Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 7th Bukit Batok Live. This platform is brought to you by Bukit Batok Youth Grassroots. We'll be having a weekly 30-minute performance on this platform, and today we have Matthew with us. Matthew is a local award-winning singer, songwriter, vocal coach, and more. He has represented Singapore and won silver for the performance of original composition in the World Championship of Performing Arts at Hollywood. Now let us have him on to introduce to us the songs that he will be presenting to us today. Hi Matthew, how are you today?
Hi Bernice, thanks for having me on the show. It's a privilege and honor. I feel great and I feel very honored to be here on this platform, having lived in Bukit Batok for more than 15 years, I think. Yeah. So today I'm very honored to also to share with you some of the songs that are very close to my heart. You can see the phrase behind me, never give up. Most of the songs that I intend to feature today do have to do with the theme of perseverance, resilience, and being able to have an anchor in your life. So hopefully the songs that I share will be inspiring to all who also tune in as well.
Okay, can you really like to introduce us maybe the names of the 4 songs that you'll be presenting to us today?
Certainly, the first song that I'd like to introduce to you is Bring Him Home from the musical Les Miserables. Les Miserables, as some of you might know, is actually written from a novel by Victor Hugo, and it's about a story about redemption, about grace and mercy. And the song Bring Him Home is sung by the title character Jean Valjean, and later on I'll be able to elaborate why I chose that song as the first song. The second song has to do with a short local movie I had the privilege of producing and making about 3 years ago. It's called Unbroken, 不倒翁, which is the Mandarin equivalent for the English title of the movie. And the third song that I have in mind for you is called Grew on Me. I composed this during the SG50 period, and it also was a tribute to my wife, who was my first and only girlfriend. And finally, the last song, True Love That Binds, is a song that I composed just recently during the lockdown period, especially in the midst of our COVID-19 pandemic, where I was convicted about the importance of what really binds us to our character and to the true intrinsic worth of an individual.
All right, thank you so much, Matthew, for these 4 songs. Now, all right, without further ado, let us kickstart the night with the very first song, Bring Him Home.
God on high, hear my prayer in my need. You have always been there. He is young, he's afraid. Let him rest, heaven blessed. Bring him home, bring him home, bring him home. It's like the sun I might have known if God had granted me a son. The summers die one by one, how soon they fly on and on, and I am old and will be gone. Bring peace, bring him joy. take, you can give. Let him be. Let him live. If I die, let me die. Let him live. Bring him home. Bring him home. Bring him home.
Thank you so much for the first song, Bring Him Home from Les Miserables. So Matthew, I would like to ask you, what actually got you into singing? Like, what ignited your passion towards singing?
The reason why I mentioned just now during the introduction that I would actually use the first song, Bring Him Home, as a lead in to explain why I got into singing. These two are actually interrelated, and let me explain why. When I was young, my mother actually, before giving birth to me, encountered some birth complications that were life-threatening, and this resulted in nearly both of us having a fatal consequence in terms of dying. But fortunately, both of us were safe in the nick of time. But in the interim, while she was facing difficulties, I was still in her womb, and that resulted in complications that were invisible to the eye, but led to neurological damage. And it only became apparent when I was growing up there was something amiss about my growth and learning processes. I just thought I was very slow, and upon a time when I was growing up, without betraying too much of my age, basically there was lack of consciousness and awareness of special learning needs, especially invisible learning disabilities. So I grew up with this trauma and this idea that I was basically not gifted, slow, and often was a victim of bullying and trauma, and as well as victimization from others who were brighter and stronger. So the song Bringing Home actually was, in a sense, bringing me home in terms of discovering my true calling and passion. I had no CCA at that point in time when I entered secondary school. I wanted to join a drama club because when I was young, even though I was slow in coordination as well as maths and science, which were my greatest weaknesses, I had a gift and an inclination towards the arts, towards speaking, towards speech, and towards performance. But I only discovered that in terms of acting because I took part in drama classes. So I enrolled in the drama club in secondary school, but sadly there were no classes or no training sessions at that point of time. So in the end, quite by accident, I just auditioned for the choir, and I managed to get in, and the rest is history. So I was in an all-boys school, and of course, singing was not considered a very macho and very popular activity for guys. It may even be considered as a CC thing. So when I first joined the choir, of course, there were no big hurrahs and so on. I just accidentally discovered that I could sing, and henceforth, that became my so-called interest and passion in singing. But it was mostly just choral singing and being able to fit into a group. I was brought home to the fact that through all this singing and through all this exposure to music, that a person is never truly, in a sense, useless based on the evaluation of their ability. It's rather based on whatever strengths are given to you. Everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses. It's what you do with those strengths and how you use those strengths to actually encourage and help others. But it took me some time to get to that because I was unraveling my issues of lack of self-esteem, as well as the issues of not being of worth. And so I was brought home through music as a medium to discover more about the intrinsic value of a person's life and a person's value. But it was a long, arduous process. I was in a choir from secondary to JC, and even in the army, I was part of what is known as the Music and Drama Company, in the SAF choral group, which is an a cappella pop singing choir. So after all this exposure to singing, I began to move on to individual singing with various teachers, both locally as well as overseas. And that began my journey into composition, as well as singing different genres of music, ranging from classical, musical theater, pop, jazz, and the entire process took about 20 over years, close to 30 over years. It's been helping me to bring me home to the fact that music can be a way to also help others be aware of what really matters in life. Now, being involved in music could be a situation where you get caught up in the fame game, where it's all about getting popularity, getting known for your works, being up there in talent competitions. But for me, from the onset, I chose to concentrate more on the intrinsic aspects of using music as an educational tool. That's because I became a teacher, and some teachers did change my perspective about teaching. Initially, I was quite against my teachers because I thought they looked down on me as well. But I encountered some good teachers who changed my perspective about teaching. So I became a teacher, and music became a means to an end to help me to reach out to students and to educate them. So music to me is not the final goal in itself. It's not something I put on a pedestal that's so important, but it's rather a means to achieving an intrinsic end of inspiring and helping others who are struggling through life with struggles similar to mine. So that is an answer to how I was brought home to using music as a means to find my calling in life.
Okay, thank you so much, Matthew. That was really heartwarming to know all the backstory of how you got into singing and why you chose Bring Him Home as a lead song. And then now, without further ado, let us just go into the second song for today, which will be Unbroken.
感到失落，只剩孤独寂寞，反复无话可说。我不懂到底因为什么，怠慢一些什么，路途怎么如此坎坷。忽然间，遥远的你像束光划破黑暗，流露一丝温暖，生命开始有了希望。因有你相伴，风雨中保护我的避风港，迷雾中出现的一座灯塔，照亮我的前方，不再迷惘，成为我坚强的力量。安静的让我把心情沉淀，每一次转身你就在身边，相信对我的爱从不改变，屹立在我心中，你是光芒，多困难都安然无恙，因有你相伴。嘲笑还是冷雨，我都让它过去。可能真怠慢一些什么，像个傻瓜什么，没人懂我需要珍惜。你却敞开了我的心房，生命的主张不再那么荒凉。你眼中我放弃隐瞒，因有你相伴。避风港，迷雾中出现的一座灯塔，照亮我的前方，不再迷茫，成为我坚强的力量。安静的让我把心情沉淀，每一次转身你就在身边，相信对我的爱 中火焰。爱你的人不惜一切，再爱你一遍。风雨中划过我的避风港，迷雾中出现的一座灯塔，照亮我的前方，不再迷惘，成为我坚强的力量。安静的让我把心情沉淀，每一次转身你就在身边，相信对我的爱从不改变。屹立在我心中，你是光芒，因有你我学会坚强。
And ladies and gentlemen, that was Unbroken. So Matthew, how has with the whole COVID-19 situation going on, how has the circuit breaker affected you? Since you just entered the phase 2 of the circuit breaker, how has it changed for you? Has it been any different as compared to before this new phase for you?
Thanks for the question, Bernice. I think it would not be an understatement to say how the circuit breaker has affected many Singaporeans in more ways than one, not just in terms of employment, but also in terms of contacts with people and intimacy, as well as being able to have a sense of belonging because we're so far apart. The second song that I was hoping to actually use to tie into this part of the circuit breaker is entitled Unbroken. It's taken from a local movie I had the privilege of getting full sponsorship for, and to produce a story which is based on my experiences growing up. I mentioned just now earlier part in the interview as to the invisible learning disabilities I suffered from. They were only diagnosed very much later in life when I was serving national service. And these two conditions are under the spectrum of what we know as dyslexia. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the word dyslexia, the term, and even our late minister mentor had mild dyslexia. However, my conditions are not pertaining to reading and writing per se. They are more of subsets of the spectrum of dyslexia. Let me elaborate on that. The first condition is called dyspraxia, as in Dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is to do with coordination, motor movements, like moving left and right. So you could imagine how I struggled with marching, stripping of the rifle, and many other cognitive as well as coordination movements in national service, although I was trying my best. And the second condition I had was dyscalculia, as in Dyscalculia. The word calculate itself probably gives you a clue to what I was struggling with, which I mentioned in the earlier part of the interview. Calculation. So suffice to say, I was struggling a lot with simple arithmetic as well as scientific concepts. And I guess my mental sums is nothing to crow about. And also when it comes to all those science practical lessons in the lab, like physics, chemistry, I could not get a single experiment right. So I was pretty broken when I was young. Broken in terms of self-esteem, because when you're young, you gauge your worth by how popular you are, how well accepted you are by your peers and your friends as well as your teachers. I had none of those. I was not well accepted nor welcomed by many. I was quite a loner, bullied often, and quite isolated. And as such, to bring all this story back to circuit breaker, to answer Bernice's question, sorry about the long runabout, is because in the midst of all this isolation, which is similar to how many of us are feeling during circuit breaker, I began to experience what it means to be unbroken. Not in the sense that the difficulties go away. Like, for example, we're in phase 2 now. We have no idea whether there'll be a spike in cases with more people going out. And so we are still in a flux as to what will happen in South Korea as we see the cases are going up again. So we are not, this battle is not over by by any gauge or estimation so far. So in the midst of this, how do we still remain unbroken? So the whole movie revolves around the theme of what we call in Mandarin a 不倒翁. I think the English word for it is called Rolly Polly Toy. I was trying to find the equivalent for that. And if many of you have played this, or those are older like me, have played this toy, it's just as simple as you try and topple the toy, it comes back to the center again because of this physics concept known as center of gravity, CG. Although I'm not good in physics, I do remember that part of CG very well. So all of us has a certain CG, right? That's the basis of how we live our lives. Something drives us in life. It could be our jobs. It could be the fact that we need approval from somebody. It could be the fact that we need some kind of promotion or some kind of affirmation from a boyfriend or girlfriend. And when that thing is removed from us, then we get so devastated that reveals what is that center of gravity. For me, finding that CG was very important. So that CG was about how your intrinsic worth is not based on how people approve you, but rather what kind of character you have and how the character is forged in the midst of difficulties. They may not go away because my conditions won't go away. It's a lifelong affliction, so to speak. And so learning how to cope with this and not be bitter towards those who bullied me, not to hate, and yet to learn how to use what I have to bless others and to encourage others, that took a monumental effort on a daily basis. It's not just a one-off thing. So in this circuit breaker, most of us tend to suffer from a few things. Lethargy, because we're mostly at home and we don't have the usual schedule that we have of going to work. So sometimes we wake up very late, we just surf the internet whatsoever. So we tend to lose purpose and resolve. Second thing we suffer from is the sense of detachment because we don't have physical contact with many people, and so we get very distant. We don't keep in touch, although we have a lot of virtual tools at our disposal. Or thirdly, we could be staying at home with people who we quarrel with every day, and that could lead to a lot of acrimony and a lot of problems in relationships. So all these things can lead to us discovering what actually is the center of our gravity. And in this song itself, I was trying to actually bring across the message that perhaps many of us have been too absorbed with what is external, defining what we are worth, because that's how we often attach importance. And once those external things are removed, like during the pandemic, and when the jobs are no longer so available, when our promotional prospects are no longer that bright, we discover our worth has plummeted, and it just goes up and down accordingly to circumstances and emotions. And that's where the center of gravity is very volatile and it keeps fluctuating. So this song is about finding what really carries you through regardless of circumstances, so that you will not be tossed so easily by different circumstances because you are stable, you have an anchor, and that's how you remain unbroken. Doesn't mean that you don't have any problems, you don't have weaknesses, because this world's imperfect. You will always have these weaknesses and problems. There will always be opposition, there'll be problems, there'll be people against you, there'll be bullying, whatsoever. But it's how you respond to them and how you continue to be able to do what you are convicted of doing. Never give up, as shown behind here in the background. That causes you to be unbroken. So this song actually reminds us how to be unbroken in the midst of a crisis that our nation is going through right now. I'm sure phase 2 is very exciting for most of us. We went out yesterday to buy groceries. Wow, the roads were so crowded. The cars were all over the road and the expressways. But I could also sense a certain, what we call in Hokkien, right? The chiong. We chiong all the way, chiong to buy groceries, chiong the roads. Because maybe over the months, the repressed frustration and anger all comes out. Now we are released. It's like animals from a cage being released, just burst out, chiong all the way. So that's why I heard yesterday, I'm not sure how accurate this is, there were 15 car accidents so far island-wide. And perhaps it's because of all the repressed frustration over the months of staying at home. But all these things are still based on circumstantial and emotional, which we are as human beings exposed to. We can't deny them. But it's how we do not allow them to overwhelm us and still find a meaning and purpose in the midst of different circumstances that help us to stay steady and true. So that's why I chose the song Unbroken. It's in Mandarin, but the English subtitles are in the music video. And perhaps it's a time for us to reflect also throughout this whole crisis. What is important to us in life, right? I mean, the things we used to think were important suddenly are not so important anymore. What used to be essential suddenly not so essential. So is our essential nature based on circumstances or based on who we are? I suppose this song is a thought-provoking platform for all of us to evaluate through this crisis. What is the direction? goal, vision, and motive, and the center of gravity of our lives.
Okay, thank you so much, Matthew. I'm pretty sure that a lot of Singaporeans out there, or those people who are living in the pandemic currently, can relate to how you feel and the things that you have said so far. So without further ado, let us continue with the third song for tonight, which is Grew On Me.
Seems like yesterday on the playground, in the games of our youth. On her 5 stones I clattered them all, chasing dreams of police and thieves. It was the cutest pout in her angry bout that turned to a dimpled smile. Thank God for rabbit sweets that I used to appease at the moment she grew on me. Oh, what a song! It was a game all these years that made her my dear. From the heat of the summer to the winter cold, she outshines the sun. She basks in the glow, jelly, jelly, long jump but irreplaceable part, lovely self-ding dong. She made the harshest of winds seem like specks of dust. Oh dear me, you grew on me. Bell rang after school, running feet to her to catch our favorite cartoons. Over root beer floats and little jokes, Yao Han dates in 82. Remember seeing Yao taste on the monorail, quick as time, so we grew. From daily school to soldieroo, every thought I spent it missing you. Oh, what a song! It was a game all these years that made her my dear. From the heat of the summer to the winter cold, she outshines the sun. She basks in the glow, jelly, jelly, long jump but irreplaceable part, lovely self-ding dong. She made the harshest of winds seem like specks of dust. Oh dear me, you grew on me. In my times of doubt, I felt the thoughts collide. I wondered if she could understand. But in weakness she was always there, above me the depths of gloom. Oh, what a song! It was a game all these years that made her my dear. From the heat of the summer to the winter cold, she outshines the sun. She basks in the glow, jelly, jelly, long jump but irreplaceable part, lovely self-ding dong. She made the harshest of winds seem like specks of dust. Oh dear me, you grew on me.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that would be the third song, Grew On Me. Now, Matthew, I think a lot of people would want to know, like, how did you learn? Not say how, but like, where do you learn how to compose songs? Where it's like self-taught? Where do you get your inspiration from? Yeah. So, you want to share with us how do you go about with the process?
Sure, thanks for the question, Bernice. As mentioned, my disabilities were in the area of coordination and fine motor movements. So when I started picking up piano, which was my first instrument when I was young, it was an ordeal because playing piano requires a lot of coordination, right? You have to coordinate your left hand, right hand, look at the score, And at that point of time, I think the craze was taking music exams under the Royal College of Music. I mean, most people in primary school say, do you take the piano exam? So there was a craze to take the graded exams from grade 1 to grade 8. And I didn't enjoy taking music at first because I associated it with examinations, you see. I associated it with passing, being evaluated in terms of how good you are. And as I struggled and I was slower in my learning, even in music compared to many others, my sister was also learning piano. She's my younger sister, but she was a piano prodigy. So whatever she could learn in about maybe 1 hour, I would take a few months. So the comparison as a young kid was there. I always felt that, oh, I'm always inferior. So I always remember when I was playing the piano, I could not get it right. I would throw the books and the scores on the floor. I would throw tantrums and say, why am I doing this nonsense? I'd rather not take piano anymore. So my mother said to me, well, we're not forcing you. It's up to you. If you want to take piano, no one's forcing you. But I guess I felt an implicit pressure, the sense that, hey, my sister is still taking it. If I give up now, it's a bit wimpy. It's like cowardly way out kind of thing. So I just doggedly persevered, and I still managed to get through it. But only after passing the final grade 8, which is the basic highest degree for piano basics, that I began to look back and realize that the music skills I learned in retrospect were helpful. So even though I didn't enjoy the process, maybe the process was not as wholesome and holistic as it could be, but through the pain and through learning how to be patient, to have discipline to sit down for hours to practice, those things were what shaped my character and helped me to work hard, you see. So since I was slower than most people, the only way I could cope and get through the PSLE and O levels for that matter, which I struggled immensely with school because I was failing like nobody's business, was that I learned to work much harder than most people. Work harder doesn't mean work smarter. I just work harder. I didn't know what it meant to work smarter at that point of time, but I thought just by plowing through and just putting your head down and just showing all the way, you'll be able to get through. And it was a miracle I got through our system of PSLE and O levels, but it was just purely a tool for me to get somewhere. I suppose it was only when I began to learn singing in the choir, then I began to realize that piano as a solitary activity could graduate to a group coordinated activity where you learn to blend with others, cooperate with others. But even then itself, music was still just a CCA because we need to get CCA points and to make sure our student testimonials contain the fact that we took part in Singapore Youth Festival and so on, what medals we won. It still was about the extrinsic achievement and not so much the intrinsic enjoyment of music, the process of learning it. I guess it was more towards after in the army, after I was serving in the basic military training, when my conditions were officially diagnosed and acknowledged, even though it took a long time for them to acknowledge it as a genuine condition, because the default mode, most people would think that in the army, most people are trying to disguise. I suppose the term we call it is talking. So if people are trying to escape, say default, you must be talking, you must be a talking person. So I was trying really hard. I took no MC, I chilled all the way. I trained for the army by running, really being very fit. I ran every day, did chin-ups and so on. But I realized in the army, being physically fit is only one part of the equation. Learning how to move with the psychological stress as well as coordination was the other part which I could not function because of my coordination disabilities and so on. So at that point of time, when I was really down, I had the opportunity to audition for the Singapore Armed Forces Choir, and to my surprise, I was selected. So I became the music IC of the choir, and that was also another important turning point in my life where I began to learn more about the pop genre. At the point of time, I think the boy bands were the rage of the 90s, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, and so on. And that's where we started learning all those songs and learn to sing a cappella. A cappella means without musical accompaniment, using your voices as instruments. And that was the a cappella renaissance of Singapore, so to speak, at a point of time. So all these influences from piano discipline, learning how to be disciplined, all the way to singing as a choir in a group, and also being able to move to the pop genre were the background and the foundation stones that helped me to discover more about how to use music to reach out to others. But at a point of time while I was learning how to also sing pop songs, I began to take lessons in classical singing. Classical singing is where most people think you sound like opera stars, all very backwards, and you learn how to sing Italian, German. Most of these languages don't make sense to most Singaporeans. So even though I learned a technique of using vocal, singing those very artistic songs, there was a connection issue because language was a barrier. Most people would not understand what you're singing about, you see. So that began to cause me to do some soul searching. Yeah, I may sing like a voice of an angel, but people do not understand what I'm singing. And if the content does not help them to relate to what they have in their everyday lives, then the connection isn't there. You have done well to sing a song, but you're not connected or communicated. So I began to realize that there is this big chasm and gulf that I had to actually bring or bridge together. And that became my process of thinking about composition. Because the composition of the songs I wrote were based on my experiences of my early life all the way to NS and subsequently to varsity. And it had to do with the bullying, the victimization, the anguish I felt, the loneliness. And sad to say, but most artists actually are most inspired when they go through tough times and when they go through afflictions. I suppose if you have a really easy life and life is smooth sailing, it's tough to get inspiration that actually helps you to write about stuff that touches the heart. Because when you are suffering, you know what, you need to empathize with those who are also going through challenges. And then your song is an outflow of that empathy that you have. So it was only in varsity I began to realize I needed to learn how to translate my experiences in music to my own songs. So my very first song I composed, it was more the fact that the process of songwriting for me is like this. I may be a bit different from other songwriters. It's first based on an inspiration that I have based on experiences and observations of what's going on in my life and what I observe around me. Then from that idea, I translate that to words and lyrics, like a poem. And then from the poem with the lyrics, I begin to develop the melody as well as the harmony and the various background vocals. So the technical parts come later. It's the overarching message and the essence of the song that often drives the composition process. So this third song, Grew On Me, actually was a tribute, as I mentioned just now, to my first and only girlfriend, who is now my wife. Because of my disabilities, you can guess, right? After secondary school, I was in junior college. And in the junior college, there were many, I would not want to divulge too much about the culture of the school, but those who were very well-spoken, charming, polished guys especially, that was where they had the most girlfriends and they had the most popularity. I was anything but that. So I was very lonely and isolated as usual. And of course, approaching people of the opposite gender was very awkward for me. Because also I was from all boys school, I had that exposure to the opposite gender. So basically, I was very nerdish, ball stacks, side partying, the typical nerd. And I just felt so lonely. I thought I would be lonely and single for the rest of my life. I mean, I couldn't even count the number of girlfriends my friends have almost every week. And some of them, they keep changing girlfriends almost every single week. So I thought, well, how my life is so different from theirs. They're so able to get friends and people following them so easily. And I thought, I'm gonna be alone for the rest of my life, and I better get used to that idea. But in varsity, I met this lady, and it's that I knew her since childhood. It's just that I never got a chance to really speak to her. I knew she existed, but I never got to speak to her. And in the movie Unbroken, it does detail the story of how I got to know her better, especially in varsity. But she was different from other ladies I knew. That's not to mention that other ladies are bad. It's just that for her, she was different from my perspective because she tended to look more at other things other than, I guess, appearances or how popular you were. She was looking more for whether you had a heart compassion and whether you are a man of principle. And at first, I regarded her as a good friend. We used to have lunches together and talk. But I never thought she'd be interested in me. It was just the fact I was interested. It was a one-sided thing. So at a point of time after, we were communicating through email, but it never went beyond email. So after I graduated from varsity, I was trained to become a teacher. And I think most of you do know who are teachers who are listening in. You need to go through 1 year NIE, National Institute of Education. So in NIE also, there were a lot of people trying to find boyfriends and girlfriends. To be surprised that it's like a breeding ground for finding your future spouses, right? So for me also, I didn't find anyone, so it was a lonely process. But I began to compose my first song called Treasure because I liked this lady who became my wife and I didn't know how she felt. But that song Treasure was about how I found somebody who looks beyond the physical, looks beyond the disabilities that someone has, She looks beyond to what we know as the heart, which often we say the very formulaic thing in Hollywood, oh, follow your heart. But what's really the heart to people, right, is what you are really inside in terms of the choices you make every day, who you really are, what you stand for, and that determines the fiber or the core of a person. So at that point of time, I wrote a song Treasure. I released my first 2 albums, Treasure being one of them, which is all about compositions I had. And the second one, If I Loved You, about musical theatre songs from the Rodgers and Hammerstein, even like the Sound of Music. So when I wrote that song, apparently on hindsight, my wife told me she suspected that song was meant for her, but she wasn't certain also that I was interested in her. See, we were all playing the guessing game. So when I began to enter teaching, my only concern was surviving, because the first 3 years of teaching were very intense. Every day was about dealing with discipline problems, marking, dealing with many other issues. Romance was the last part of my consciousness. But during my birthday, during my second year of teaching, I received a birthday card from her. And I never got a birthday card from any girl before in my entire life. So that to me was a milestone. And so I said, wow, somebody, she actually gave me a birthday card, so maybe there is some interest, hopefully. So that began my process of beginning to approach her. I remember on one fateful day, I did approach her over the phone and asked her, are you interested in pursuing a relationship? Which is very weird how most guys will start a relationship, or I'm not sure how other people do it, but for me, it was a very formal phone call. And to my surprise, she said, yes, I've been thinking along the same line, in fact, and I was wondering if you will ever approach me. I said, wow, I never knew that. And so began our long-term romance. We actually dated for quite a number of years to get to know each other better. And later on, I wrote other songs as well, not just to do with my relationship with her, but also to do with the experiences I had. And so the other albums I released, like You Are the One, I released about 8 albums. So half of them were covers of other songs. The other half of the albums were on original songs that I wrote. So besides Treasure, I wrote other songs that also presented that unique perspective of how I found someone who loved me. And my family members also were always behind me in the sense that whenever I did badly for examination, they say, what matters is how you go through it and your character, which is quite unusual for Singaporean parents now. So I was very blessed in the sense that I had parents who did not follow the general grain of how achievements are more important than character, and they actually modeled it and lived it, even though it was not easy being compared to other kids at a point of time. So the compositions that I wrote were basically based on that kind of inspiration of looking beyond the extrinsic, going to what really matters in the intrinsic. These are not very marketable themes, nor are they very commercial themes, which you hear on the radio, where it's mostly about puppy love, breaking up, falling in love. But they make us think a little bit more about life and what really matters. And also through these songs, I infuse different genres of classical, musical theatre, jazz, and pop. So the different albums over the years show my evolution as a musician in terms of exposure to genres. But the overarching message has always been quite similar. And so the song grew on me is the sense that I grew up with people who then became my anchor and 不倒翁, so to speak, my CG, my center of gravity. So my wife to be, whom I knew since young, also grew on me. So the song is a very nostalgic Singlish song with many Singaporeanized terms, like the games we used to play in primary school, Oapiasum. I'm not sure if kids still play that, but from what I gathered from my other contacts with teachers and students who I still teach, there's still a game called Oapiasum apparently. And also you'll see things like things like rabbit sweets, which you used to take when you were young, snacks like gaga and so on. There are many allusions to past cultural icons that we used to have. In Sentosa, we had the monorail, we had Yao Han, which is the biggest shopping department and store at that point of time. And so it's about the growing up experiences in the 80s and 90s and how people who are with you and care for you, they grow on you. And these are relationships that continue to thrive and last in spite of difficulties and struggles that we have. So the context of the song Grew on Me was a tribute not only to my wife, but also the fact that there were people who never gave up on me and continue to grow on me. I mentioned the 2 teachers before in junior college who changed my perspective of teaching. They were 2 teachers who taught me the subject of history. Most students don't like history, and social studies, which is a compulsory subject for most students, they hate it, mostly because they do badly in it. That's why they hate the subject, which is quite logical. But those two teachers didn't like me or treat me well because I was scoring A's. In fact, I was still failing, but they could see I was trying my level best. They actually saw that I was sincere and earnest. I was doing my best, even though I was struggling. And so they never looked down on me, you see. But they didn't give me any preferential treatment. It's just that I saw they treated me differently from my teachers in the past. And that made me reevaluate the value of teaching, which is why I took up teaching as a tribute to them. And I taught the same subject they taught me, which is history. So they never realized the impact they had on me until I showed the movie 3 years ago. I invited them to the movie premiere. And they were so surprised that, number one, I had disabilities because I didn't know I wasn't diagnosed with disabilities then. So they had no idea I had disability. They just know I was slow. And they had no idea that they changed my perspective of teaching. They had no idea that they impacted my decision to become a teacher. Nor did they have the idea that I would teach history. Of all the classmates and all the classes they taught, I think I'm the only person in the class who became a teacher. So they have no idea. So sometimes the little things we say and do and how we treat people, you never know how you impact somebody's life until many, many years later. Sometimes you never know. But that's why the words we say and things we do have an impact on people, you see. And so when we are there, put in people's lives to grow on them, we can either grow on them in a very negative way or positive way. And we need to be very mindful of what we say and do, because we can say it's my life, I can say what I like, but you never know the impact it has on somebody's in terms of their self-esteem, their values, their mission in life. And many years down the road, when you meet the person now again and say, hey, do you know what you said actually impacted me even up to now? You may have no idea. So I guess this was a real eye-opener for me, where I began to discover that we all play a part in growing on other people's lives. Other people also play a part in growing in our lives. And we need to be very, I suppose, careful. Careful is I suppose is a term that's too technical. We need to be very mindful. Mindfulness is the rage nowadays, right? Mindful of the fact that our lives and who we are as a person, intrinsically, our center of gravity impacts the people in our lives around us, family members, work much, much more than we can ever possibly imagine.
Thank you so much. I'm pretty sure a lot of people that are thinking to start composing songs can actually learn from your little details in life and how you actually manage to use what you have experienced in life and translate them into your songs and into your composition. I think that's a very important step when it comes to song composition. So right now we'll be going on to the last song for today, which is True Love That Bites.
To know you'll always be the one who stays through thick and thin. When others leave to turn aside and fears give in, the winds of change through truths within. Who are those ones who would not leave? The ties that bind through times of woe, they won't give in. It's who we are in times of calm security that anchors us through pain and trust perplexities, to give us courage, strength, compassion, dignity, to not give in. The sacrifices kindness shown in words and deeds, they may not be applauded, noticed, praised, acclaimed. Be true in the small things, then you will find it's true love that binds. The cause of all mortality reminds us what we need to be. Don't think that you have all this time to wait and see. days of grief or peace. It's through such ones where faith is trials with victory. It's only up in times of calm security that anchors us through pain and trust perplexities, to give us courage, strength, compassion, dignity, to not give in. The sacrifices kind and shown in words and deeds, they may not be applauded, noticed, praised, acclaimed. Be true in the small things, then you will find it's true love that binds. There may be those who are always bending with the wind, so be the one that's firm, true, steadfast in the rain. It's who we are in times of calm security that anchors us through pain and trust perplexities, to give us courage, strength, compassion, dignity, to not believe. The sacrifices kind and shown in words and deeds, they may not be applauded, noticed, praised, acclaimed. Be true in the small things, then you will find it's true love that binds. Be true in the small things, then you will find it's true love that binds.
So with that, we have come to the end of the performance. We have come to the end of the 4 songs of today's session, with the last song being True Love That Binds. So Matthew, is there anything else that you would like to say to the audience watching you right now?
Well, thank you so far for all those who have been tuning in and still staying on with us. The last song was titled True Love That Binds because it sounds like a very generic and formulaic title, but it was actually written in the midst of much great pain and anguish. As mentioned just now, I've been working for a long time as a school teacher for close to 15 years, and I've taught students from all walks of life, ranging from broken families to those from the very high social economic status groups. And it's not all I was involved in other jobs that were more freelance in nature, coupled with the fact I worked in various places that were either related to public service or civil service. And even in the midst of a noble profession of teaching, there are many, many problems relationally that all teachers may encounter as well, either with students or with other colleagues, because colleagues are, after all, human beings. And as human beings, we're all fallible. And conflicts are very much a part of our lives, and how we respond to the conflicts also forms what kind of character that we develop over the years. So this song was written in the midst of a very painful period where I was actually sincerely helping those whom I really cared for and really had good intentions towards. But strangely, things were twisted and warped to an extent where those people whom I had good intentions and really wanted to help with an honest and sincere heart, it turned out very, very opposite to the outcome which I desired. And it was very acrimonious and very, very disappointing and heartbreaking. And the period of time, I saw a lot of inversion of what I knew to be, what I thought was the natural order of things. For example, because I know most of us do say that we're born with people who are about the same wavelength as us. So, for example, if you are a graduate, you want to bond with the other people who are graduates, and that has caused the whole argument of elitism in Singapore, where people of the same wavelength or the same status group always hang around with others of a similar group. And because of that, we tend to be very unempathetic towards people of different walks of life. So in that situation, I began to realize that those whom I considered were good friends I could trust were not so much, I would say, those who were brilliant intellectually or very capable, or those who spoke very well. But actually, my good friends were those of what we considered the lower strata of society, the blue-collar workers. For example, the uncle who will always empty my rubbish bin. When you make conversation with the toilet cleaners, the gardeners, those who are sweeping, you'd be surprised to realize how rich a life in terms of reservoir of information and knowledge and experiences they have, and how much they value those who actually treat them as people, not as just workers who just fulfill services to make life easier for people. And when you treat them as a person, they really appreciate it. And that began to confirm what I also learned in the army as well. In the army also, I guess there was a lot of jealousy towards what they consider the A-level people. They say, oh, you guys are air level, plenty of study smarts, but no street smarts. So there was a lot of rivalry among those who are more educated, less educated. But in my army experience, I began to realize also what I considered as good and what's considered as civilized was also challenged, because those people playing all those political games of lying, cheating, and twisting and turning were those who were more capable and intellectual, and those are the ones who were not trustworthy. But the ones who were my better friends in the army were people like gangsters, the paikia as we call them. We even had a full-time loan shark in my bunk who was called Along. Yeah, seriously, his name was Along, right? And he had one big tattoo at his back. I also made friends with another person who was a dropout from PSLE but had been working all his life. But these people are very experienced because they've been out there in the world. So when they see that you're going to help them, treat them as a person, they regard you as a friend. And I suppose, as they say in Mandarin, 讲义气, they appreciate friendship. Loyalty is very important to them. And when you treat them as a person, they really appreciate that. And their loyalties don't shift and change as easily as the wind, see, because for them to get people who really respect them as people, it's very rare. So this is something I also experienced in my previous experience just a few months ago, and it was a very traumatic and difficult experience. So I began to see that I need to peel off the layers of, sometimes in Singapore we say we wayang a lot, right? Wayang is a term for putting up a show. And I suppose sometimes in our bid to fulfill KPIs, we wayang a lot to produce a result that appears very impressive, but the process of which we do it and the people whom we may have hurt while trying to achieve that goal could be questionable. So I began to realize the process of being a human being involves appreciating people for who they really are and what they stand for. Just because you're a cleaner or you are essential or non-essential worker, dependent on circumstances, it doesn't reduce your value as a person. So recently there was a whole debacle about who are the essential workers and the non-essential workers, and it caused a big furore and a big hoo-ha in social media and also across the Straits Times and other printed media as well. Apparently there was an article with a survey claiming that artists were considered the number one non-essential workers. And of course, a lot of artists were very angry about that. They say, how can you say I'm not essential? You know, I bring a certain kind of vibrancy to the soul of Singapore. And of course, we appreciate greatly the workers, the essential workers who are helping front the battle for us right now in the health sector, as well as many other areas. Without them, Singapore can't move forward or function. And many of them are sacrificing their personal safety, their own family time, and their own personal welfare for our sake. And I want to give a special shout out to our essential workers. We really value you. We think you're doing a great job. We appreciate your sacrifice and your selfless behavior and conduct throughout these tough times. But we also want you to know that we are with you in spirit as fellow Singaporeans, not because you're labeled as essential workers and then one day you're not labeled as essential. It's because of what you do on a daily basis for the sake of others. That's why we value you. And in another circumstance, you may be labeled as not essential, but what's more important is who you are and what you stand for, and people around you can see that. Although they may not voice it, I suppose the people I made friends with, like the cleaners and all that, I didn't know how important they were to me until I left the context, and when I said my goodbyes, I began to realize that these were my true friends, and they still maintain contact with me. So I began to realize now that, oh, these are the things I really ought to have paid more attention in and focus on, because a person's worth is not how high your status is. Sometimes we carry bosses or carry people who are useful to us because it's all about self-interest. But people who are not so useful to us, we put a back burner because they won't help us in our self-interest or advancement. That's why relationships are transactional. And that's what is the opposite of true love that binds. True love, it means that you love a person for who they are and what they stand for. And if you have that, you are going past the label mentality and the fact that somebody is evaluated based on their achievement. And that is what binds our country through this tough time. As I said before, phase 2 is by no means the sign that everything is over. There could be a spike in cases, there could be a resurgence, hopefully not. And you can see other countries are going back to lockdown, like Beijing, for example. There is no guarantee Singapore may not suffer that, although our government is doing a great job in controlling the situation and regulating and giving updates and being very transparent. But in the midst of this situation where life and death is at stake and we never know our tomorrows, perhaps it's not too late to consider today how we live our lives and how we view people. Because how you live your life and how you view life and your principles will affect how you live, how you talk, how you conduct yourselves, and how you affect other people more than you think. And that is why True Love That Binds was written in that painful context, but it was also a reminder to myself that I was not on the wrong path. I was doing what I could faithfully and responsibly, and I made an impact in terms of being friendly to those who needed a hand of friendship, and that friendship was very rewarding, even in the midst of circumstances that are very unfavorable externally.
Okay, thank you so much, Matthew. With that, we have come to the end of the whole session of Bukit Batok Live for today. So if you like what you see, please do remember to tune in to our future sessions that will also be on Saturday at 8 p.m. And also, of course, if you have not watched our previous sessions, you may still go to the Facebook page. There's still the videos there. You can go and check them out. We have other talented singers as well, and performers also, instrumentalists. And there will be more coming up. So everyone, please remember to stay safe during this period of time, even though we have entered a new phase and it calls for a celebration, but still remember to stay safe, stay healthy, and maintain social distancing. So with that, have a good night and see you again next week. Bye.
Bye-bye. Good night. Thanks for being with us.